Shields and swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and placed, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hello, minions. By special request today, I want to talk about Andreas Capellanus' The Art of Courtly Love. It is a 12th century text. It is non-fiction-ish, and it is essentially a book of manners about how to love appropriately. And it is always something that when I teach it, my students are fascinated about. They're fascinated in the book of manners, the different sets of ethics, the ethics that really appeal, I think, to our 21st century sensibilities, and the ethics that don't appeal to our 21st century sensibilities. And so I think that's our first impulse, is to look at it that way. And in truth, I think that's a very valuable way to look at it, as a book of manners, as a book of how to love appropriately, courtly love appropriately. Now, first of all, we got to be clear what we mean by courtly love, because it's going to be important for what we say later. Courtly love is not generally romantic love. It is specifically the kind of love that you see happening at court. It's explicit that peasants are not involved in this, for example. So courtly love has nothing to do with peasants. It has to do with the appropriate way that people of a certain social class carry on their love affairs. And also, in The Art of Courtly Love, Andreas Capellanus makes it clear he's also not talking about marital affection. He says essentially that courtly love cannot exist between married people. It's a different kind of love, the marital affection there. So it's not that at all. So really, we're talking about a much more limited thing than just love generally. It is a kind of erotic or romantic love that occurs between people of the middle class and higher, who are not married to one another. And this is an interesting way of looking at it. There are lots of things, as I said, that are shocking to modern audiences, but often one of the questions is how much of this is serious, how much of this is not serious, and then also how much is descriptive and how much is prescriptive. What do we mean by that? Well, one of the questions is, how much is Andreas Capellanus describing the situation at, say, Eleanor of Aquitaine's court in the 12th century, and how much is he not describing the situation but saying, like, this would be the ideal? And the problem with that question is not that it's an invalid question. I think it's a very interesting and valid question, but rather there's a constant feedback loop between what we think is the ideal and what actually occurs. Theoretically, we're always striving for the ideal in whatever the thing is that we are doing, right? There's another question, though, and that's the focus today, which is how much of this is not talking about actual behavior, but how much of this is talking about the behavior that we see in medieval, the literary genre of romance. Now, what is a romance in literature? What a romance is in medieval literature actually doesn't have anything necessarily to do with romantic love. Some romances, will only have male characters, for example, and they are not erotically involved with one another. What a romance is a kind of courtly tale. It's a popular tale. It's in verse. It usually has to deal with, like, Charlemagne and his knights, King Arthur and his knights, or sometimes classical heroes who are then recoded as knights. Classical myths, for example, that then get recoded as knights. So, and can they deal with the kinds of things that we think of about erotic love? Sure. There's a kind of chanson d'amour, which is a song of love, and these poems are about love, right? And then they're, often between a lady and a knight. But there's also chanson de geste, like the chanson de Roland, where it's really about war, great deeds on the battlefield, right? So I think in here, clearly he's talking about courtly love. So we can throw the chanson de geste out and just think about the medieval romance of the chanson d'amour. So what if we think about this as a critique of that? What do I mean by that? Well, anytime that you are describing something, you are then, in a way, critiquing it. So let's say, for example, that you're watching a popular television show, and maybe there's a drinking game that's been invented regarding that popular television show, right? I mean, there have been many of these drinking games through the years. You know, XYZ character says this, right? There used to be one for the Bob Newhart show where every time someone said Bob, people would drink. Or, there were all sorts of them for Seinfeld where Kramer would burst into the room, you would drink, this kind of thing. Well, the nature of the drinking game, when you see something like that, is to say, hey, this is one of the elements that's necessary for this show. And sometimes this is one of the elements that's necessary for the genre, right? What we would see in this particular kind of genre. And different genres have different things that they need to do, right? So, for example, in recent years, these Hallmark Christmas movies have become very popular. And they all follow the same beat. They all have the same kind of thing. Well, when you describe it that way, you're also critiquing it as well. And so what if we take this as a critique of courtly love? Well, there's lots to be said about that, but I just want to focus in one place because I think it's very helpful for us to think about how we're writing romantic heroes and heroines in this. So in The Art of Courtly Love, he twice gives rules of love. The first time is what we might call the 12 Commandments of Love. And the second time, he gives something which he literally calls the rules of love, and there are 31 of those. Well, I don't want to go over the 31 just because they're longer, but they essentially cover the same territory as the 12 loves. And so in these, he has these dialogues. In one of the dialogues, he has a nobleman and noblewoman who are talking about love. And let me just go through them very quickly for you. Number 1, thou shalt avoid avarice like the deadly pestilence and shall embrace its opposite. So be generous. Number 2, thou shalt keep thyself chaste for the sake of her whom thou lovest. So be faithful to your love, no matter what. 3, thou shalt not knowingly strive to break up a correct love affair that someone else is engaged in, right? Don't break up other people's good love affairs, even no matter how you feel about the person. Number 4, thou shalt not choose for thy love anyone whom a natural sense of shame forbids thee to marry. This is something which is a little confusing to people because he otherwise says, hey, just because someone's married doesn't mean you can't be in love with them. And we've already heard that, married people cannot be in love with one another. The idea here is that even if you could never marry this person, if theoretically you could, they shouldn't be shameful for you to marry. 5, be completely mindful to avoid falsehood, so don't be a liar. 6, thou shalt not have many who know of thy love affair. And this is an important element. It needs to be secret. It needs to, a good courtly love is secret. Number 7, be obedient in all things to the commands of ladies. Thou shalt ever strive to ally thyself in the service of love. So man needs to serve his lady. Number 8, be giving and receiving love solaces. That is to say, I would say the physical elements of love. Let modesty be ever present, right? So you actually should still be modest, which is connected with the idea of keeping things as secret as possible. Number 9, thou shalt speak no evil. Don't talk bad about them. Number 10, thou shalt not be a revealer of love affairs. We're back to this idea of secrecy is important for love affairs. Number 11, thou shalt be in all things polite and courteous. I don't need to explain that one. And number 12, in practicing the solaces of love, thou shalt not exceed the desires of thy lover. So in the physical acts of love, you want to try to moderate to what your lover desires from that. Okay, so just taking these 12 rules of love, how do we then read this as a critique of medieval romance? Well, in here, I think we have an idea of what is an ideal character, right? And how we can know that a character has violated one of the rules and we're not supposed to like that character anymore. And some of these are ones that we could guess, if the character is greedy or if the character is speaking ill of people all the time. But one I think that we need to think about as modern audiences, or really two. One is you don't break up someone else's correct love affair. And the other one is you don't spill someone's secret. What do we mean when we say we don't break up their correct love affair? Well, in some medieval romances, like say Milun, one by Marie de France, we see that there is a woman, she's in love with a knight, and she has a baby with him secretly. It's good that it's secret. But then because of an arranged marriage, she ends up marrying someone else. Another guy who has no idea about any of this. They carry on a secret correspondence. And then when the son grows up, he connects with his father. They go back to kill her husband, but he just dies before they get there. And so they don't have to kill him. Well, often modern readers would go like, what did this guy do wrong? He was the guy who's being cheated on for all these years. And he didn't even know about this other situation at all, right? And so suddenly, he's just supposed to be killed because of this. Two people show up and say, "Hey, I'm your wife's illegitimate son and her lover from years ago. We're here to murder you." That seems hardly fair. But whether he intended to or not, he interfered with a correct love affair. And we might say, well, he didn't know about that. The secrecy is part of it. And so when we're looking at the kind of ethic, we can see that if you're writing a medieval romance, you want to write a romance in which the romance needs to be kept secret in some way. There's some element of it that forces it to be secret. And when you start to think through this, you begin to see that once we've moved away from the genre of romance, we do still keep many of these in other stories about love. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. It's certainly not a medieval romance, but there is the element of secrecy that is necessary for it, right? That everything must be secret, and that one of the reasons things go wrong is because it's secret, but that's also one of the important elements of it. And you just sort of start to look at, modern movies, right, where it turns out that so-and-so has a relationship and no one can know about it, or no one can know some element of this relationship, and that's part of what we desire about it. And so I think within the art of courtly love, we can think about it as a book of manners, but we can also think about it as a way of expressing what's important about a medieval romance. Elements of secrecy, of keeping faith with your body, of keeping faith with your word, of keeping other people's secrets as well, that this is central to it. And in fact, you could take the 12 rules he has there or the 31 rules he has later on and turn them into a drinking game. I don't recommend that because if you read enough medieval romances, it would be detrimental to your health to drink quite that much.